Hello and welcome to Monday's geography session. So today and on Wednesday we are going to be following on from our geography from last week, and we are going to carry on looking at mountains. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to look at features of mountains. So how mountains in different places differ, what the climate's like and things like that. So as a little recap, can you remember and name the 4 different types of mountains that we looked at in geography last week? So pause the video and see if you can write them down. Okay, so hopefully you remembered all 4, or at least 2 of them. So the 4 different types are fold mountains, and we looked at these. So these are mountains like the Himalayas, where the 2 plates, the tectonic plates, collide and they're pushed upwards and they are folded. Okay, so this is your typical sort of what you probably imagine a mountain to look like. Then we've got dome mountains, which was the example, the enchanted rock that was in Texas, which was in our odd one out on a lesson last week. And these are when the magma pushes up from under the surface, so it's rather the magma forming a mountain than the tectonic plates, which is why it causes a dome-like shape rather than a point. Then we've got volcanoes or fire mountains, which was an example was Mount Etna, which was on our odd one out last week. And this is where the mountain starts as a volcano. So the tectonic plates move in different ways to form volcanoes, as we learnt in geography previously. So it starts as a volcano, but the series of eruptions where the lava gushes out and then cools and adds another layer on the outside, which builds and builds and builds to create that mountain shape. So we've got fire mountains, and then we've got fault block mountains, which was when the crust of the earth and the mantle sort of crack as they move. So as they are pushed together and form mountains in the same sort of way as fold mountains, they have those telltale sort of cracks up the side to show that as they were being pushed together, as they were forming, they started to crack as they moved. Okay, so remember, mountains are landforms and they are all created by different movements of the different layers, tectonic plates on the Earth's crust. So last lesson we were looking at mountain ranges, which was a group of mountains, wasn't it? So not single mountains, but a group of mountains that are grouped together in different places, and we were looking at mountain ranges all over the world. So can you remember any of the mountain ranges and the names that we looked at last lesson and where in the world they were to? So have a pause of the video and see if you can remember without looking as many as you can. Okay, so here is a map of the world, and some of these we looked at in our last lesson. So we were asked to find the Rocky Mountains, the Transantarctic, Alps, the Himalayas. So some of these are new mountain ranges that we haven't looked at yet. So we've got the Southern Alps, the Great Dividing Range. So some of these we didn't touch upon. But mountains often form borders between countries, but some are even under the ocean. So like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge was under the ocean. The elevation, so which is how tall the mountains are, of mountains on land are measured from sea level. Some mountains don't look as tall as others, but actually have lots of their height below the sea level. Oh, wrong type of sea there. So below the sea level. Okay, so elevation is how tall the mountains are. And so it says they're measured from the sea level. So even if some mountains don't look as tall if you went out to see them, it's because a lot of their height is below the sea level. Okay, and a little fact here, so did you know 20% of the Earth's surface is mountainous? So 20% of the surface is quite a big amount of the surface. So these are the mountain ranges that we were looking at with a few extras added in. So having a think about the mountainous areas that we just looked at and where you know some of those mountain ranges are. What do you think conditions are like? So do you think it's cold, hot? Do you think it's the same in all mountain ranges because they're all tall. Have a pause and have a think. What do you think it would be like in mountainous areas? Okay, so this is what we're going to look a little bit about today. So mountain habitats have a lot of variety, so they're not all the same. Because mountains are mostly rock, there isn't much soil for growing things, and the trees, plants that do grow there are able to thrive in rocky conditions, okay? So if there are trees or plants that grow there specific, they've adapted to their environment and they can grow in those conditions. But there's not really much soil for growing things, so they're not covered in different plants. You can also find different plants and animals the higher you climb up a mountain because temperatures get cooler. Again, the plants and the animals that have adapted to those cooler temperatures. This also means that there's more rain at the top of the mountain than at the bottom. This is because hot air rises, but as it rises, it cools down. As it cools down, it loses moisture and has to drop it off somewhere along the way up. If it's cold enough, this moisture will fall as snow rather than rain, but that depends on the place where your mountain range is, if it's a colder climate. You can tell just how cold it is at the top of the mountain by looking at how much snow you can see at the summit. Some mountains are so high that it's too cold for anything to grow at the top, and there's less oxygen at very high altitude. So the higher the mountain, the less oxygen there is once you get to the top. Often all the trees stop at about the same altitude and the mountain is bare above that part from scrub and grass. This altitude is called the tree line. So there's a line called the tree line where any trees or plants stop growing because the temperature just gets too high, too cold, and the oxygen isn't sufficient. With conditions like that, living on mountains can be very challenging for animals and people. Animals that live on mountains are used to the cold temperatures and the different types of plants that grow there. So again, thinking about our science sessions, these animals have adapted to their environment. They're used to the coldness. They know how to get the right food in their environment. So it's specifically adapted animals that can survive there. So what you are going to do is you're going to create a double page spread all about mountains. And you're going to use some of the things that you're going to find out today. You're going to use some of the things you found from last lesson. So what you need to do is you need to have a mountain heading and you need to find information for each of the subheadings. Now, some things you will have already known from our previous geography sessions. Some things you'll need to use the internet today to find out more about. So how mountains are formed. We know how different mountains are formed, and you might want to talk about the 4 different variations of mountains and how each one is formed in this paragraph. Climate and conditions. So this bit is what we're looking at today mainly. So you're going to need to use the internet to find out specific climate and conditions of specific mountain ranges. On our last geography session, you were asked to find out what the conditions are like for those ones. So you might have a little bit of information, but you might want to find out some more. Animals we haven't looked at yet. So any animals that live on mountains, what mountains do they live on? How do they adapt to survive? And then the world's highest mountain. So you might want to research the highest mountain, and I'm sure there will be an order of mountains based on their height on the internet somewhere. And then are there any subject specific words to give definitions of, to create a glossary? So any words that somebody who hasn't learned about mountains might need to know. So use your information and your notes from our last mountain sessions, and also have a look on the internet, do some research to give you some more information. You can lay it out however you like, as long as you've got all the subheadings and information that you see on this slide here. We look forward to seeing what you create.